When I was 29 and living in a cramped second-floor walk-up above a laundromat, I thought I knew the kind of fear that comes from bills and broken boilers. I worked nights doing content moderation for a small startup and spent my days in a weird half-sleep, switching between coffee and cold showers. The apartment smelled like damp paper and detergent, the radiator clanking in the winter like a distant metronome. I had no idea that a single Reddit thread would rearrange everything I thought I trusted about neighborhoods and strangers. I was the sort of person who trusted routines more than people. I keyed my door the same way every night, left a cheap porch light on, and kept a spare key taped under a chipped terracotta pot because old habits die hard. My job was invisible by design. I read reports, flagged content, answered calls from a security line that sometimes did not belong to anyone at all. On the night this began, I was halfway through a 12-hour stretch, eyes gritty, headphones dulling the hum of the office. A notification popped on my phone from a subreddit I visited for insomnia and curiosity. The post title was blunt and small, like a cut. Terrifying, true stories that will keep you up all night from Reddit. I opened it expecting over-dramatized campfire tales. Instead, I read something that matched an odd smell I had noticed 3 weeks earlier in the hallway of my building. The smell I had told myself was just someone cooking late. The first detail that pulled me toward the edge was meaningless in isolation. A landlord named Carlos down the hall had taken to leaving his door open for a few minutes every morning, as if to air out a living room full of plants. He kept a small wooden box on his stoop that clicked when the building's breeze rattled the stairs. One night, I heard what I thought was a whisper through the thin wall, a syllable that could have been a television or a phone call. The whisper repeated and then stopped at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I knocked on his door the next morning. He answered in his usual sleepy voice, and the apartment smelled like cumin and damp laundry. He told me he had been up all night with a leak, and because he worked day shifts at a bakery, he sometimes left the door cracked to check on the boiler. Later that week, I found a folded note tucked under my doormat. It was blank, except for a crude drawing of a key and a tiny circle. My heart did a small, stupid leap. I kept the note, folding it between the pages of a paperback I had been reading. The subreddit thread started with a confession about a neighbor. The poster wrote in short sentences, each one soaked in a small factual tremor. They described packages disappearing, someone walking their dog late at night with headlights off, and a voicemail that began with breathing and ended with someone singing a lullaby in a language the poster did not recognize. My skin prickled. Below that post were replies that read like a neighborhood registry of the uncanny. People from 3 states reported the same pattern. I read about a delivery driver who recorded the wrong signature and then returned after midnight to correct it, and about a homeowner who found his mailbox filled with paper clips and a single old key. There was a clip embedded in one comment, shaky video shot from a dashboard camera with a timestamp at 3 in the morning. The clip showed a white van pulling up to a row of houses. A person in a gray hoodie stepped out, placed a small white box on a doorstep, looked around, and moved on. The camera then caught a silhouette pause under a street lamp and stared directly at the lens like it had seen the recorder and wanted something from it. Curiosity pushed me to cross the small line that divides innocent interest and active concern. I printed the screenshot of that van and matched the street lamp and mailboxes to my own neighborhood map. The shapes aligned. My head filled with small sensory details in a rush, each one a bead on a chain. The corridor outside my apartment smelled faintly of bleach, like someone was trying to erase something. The building's stairwell carried a particular slap of winter air when the door opened, a cold breath that tasted like pennies. My neighbor Lena from 3B, who worked as a nurse and came and went at odd hours, mentioned in passing that she had been missing deliveries. Jonas, a freelance photographer who lived 2 floors below me, told me on a late elevator ride that he kept hearing soft knocks at his door in the early morning, and that a package once sat at his feet for nearly an hour with no return address. I scribbled their names on a paper I kept in my journal. I started taking notes like a person who wanted to believe in pattern recognition more than coincidence. The first major confrontation came on a rainy Thursday. I had been awake for hours, the fluorescent office lights pressing against my eyelids like a slow ache. A new post on the thread had been updated with more footage. This one was clearer. 10 exchanges in a comment thread below debated whether the footage had been staged or edited. I messaged a user named Night Courier who claimed to have captured a delivery attempt on his Ring camera. Night Courier was cautious in his replies. He told me his name was actually Marcus and that he worked part-time as a rideshare driver. He described the night he reviewed his footage and saw a person press a small device against an apartment intercom panel. The person had moved with the rhythm of someone who had practiced this exact motion many times. Marcus wrote that the device emitted a soft chirp, and then the intercom responded with a click, like a lock giving way. He said he called the police, but they viewed the clip and told him that without a clear face showing intent, there was little to do. I asked for more details, and he sent them in a series of messages that read like a short transcript. Me: what did it look like when the person left? Marcus: they walked like they knew where they were going. Me: did they carry anything? Marcus: small bag, white box, maybe a toolkit. Me: did the intercom open? Marcus: click, yes, then door closed fast. Me: did you see a license plate? Marcus: blurry, 3 letters, maybe ends in B. Me: did you call the building manager? Marcus: yes, he said he would check the logs. What did the chirp sound like? Marcus: like a high little beep, like a kitchen timer. Were there any footsteps on stairs after? Marcus: no, just the rain and a car drive by. Me: did you feel safe after? Marcus: not really, I started sleeping with headphones in. Me: did you show this to neighbors? Marcus: a few, they watched and looked quiet. The exchanges felt small and precise, and then suddenly large. My fingers remembered 1,000 tiny sounds that had become a background track to my life, and now seemed like clues. I felt both foolish and strangely vindicated. I began to review my own video footage from an old doorbell camera I had installed months before. The footage was mostly grainy repairs of light. At 2:14 a.m. on the same night, a shadow moved along the stoop, paused, and a faint beep came through the audio, like an old microwave finishing a cycle. I replayed it, slowed it down, and watched the silhouette reach out with a device that looked like a remote with 2 buttons. It was small, pedestrian, almost domestic in its shape. It fit in a palm like a remote my grandmother used to hold for her television. After that discovery, I tried to rationalize the way people do when their lives are still intact. I called Carlos, the landlord. I called the building manager at the small property company, a woman named Rena, who had been polite and efficient the one time I had filed a noisy heating complaint. I left messages for Jonah and Lena. I called the non-emergency police line and opened a report. They took the details and told me a patrol officer would walk the building and file a form. In the background, I felt my throat tighten in a particular way that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with recognition. The backstory I kept telling myself to stay calm was not small. It had its own length and shadows. I had been born in a town where doors were padlocked, and people still left food on stoops for neighbors. My mother taught me to check the pee-hole twice. I once lost a bicycle to a neighbor who borrowed it and never returned it. Those moments taught me to catalog things and to distrust the unknown gentleness of shared space. That backstory lived in roughly 900 characters of memory. It explained why I noticed a blank note with a key drawing and why I could not dismiss the van footage. It made me phone calls while others would have simply deleted the notification and gone back to sleep. The second piece of evidence arrived like an ordinary misdelivery, which is exactly how it was designed to appear. I work with deliveries every day in my job, and I had learned to parse labels for truth. A box came to my building that was not mine. It was a medium-sized white box with no return address and a sticker that read, "Delivered." The sticker had a timestamp and an imprint of a name I did not recognize. I watched the box sit in the hallway for an hour while the rain softened the city sounds. I recorded footage on my phone with a small stabilizer because sometimes the best defense is photographic record. Inside the box was a stack of pamphlets printed on cheap paper. The pamphlets had glossy photographs of apartments with doors ajar and a heading that read, "Friendly Check-ins." At the bottom were contact numbers and a very small legal paragraph that claimed a private company offered services to check in on residents who were traveling. The paperwork used a term that felt slightly technical, like a bandage on a wound. The term was verification pad, and beneath it was a tiny line about consent. Someone had printed a set of documents designed to look like legitimate neighborhood services and then left them at doorways at 2 in the morning. I posted an excerpt on the subreddit and waited for replies. Users pointed out the use of the phrase verification pad and said it matched terminology used in some training manuals for locksmiths and independent couriers. One user linked to a forum where people traded information about devices that interfaced with intercom panels. The explanation section I posted pulled up a short technical note about frequency interrupts and relay taps. That note said in plain language that small devices could mimic the chirp a building intercom makes and then close the relay to convince a system that a resident had accepted a delivery. The note was 300 characters long and precise enough to feel dangerous. People responded with anecdotes about similar occurrences in other cities. A woman named Priya wrote that her elderly neighbor had once found a note in an Indian grocery bag telling them someone was checking in for them. A man named Elias said his camera recorded a figure using a similar device to press open a service crate, then walking away. These names joined the list I had been compiling and became a chorus of ordinary voices transformed into evidence. When the community became involved, the tenor of things shifted. We formed a small network of neighbors from nearby buildings who had experienced similar intrusions. There was Lena, who worked nights at the hospital and had a practical way of speaking about fear. There was Jonah, the photographer, who loved long lenses and who began to volunteer his time to sit near windows and keep watch. There was Priya, who suggested we convene a group chat and share footage. There was Marcus, who posted his clip. There was Rena, the building manager, who agreed to check logs despite her initial skepticism. There was Officer Ramirez from the local precinct who took my call seriously after I forwarded the ring footage and who walked the building with a flashlight. There was a delivery driver named Sam who told us he had been approached by a man who offered to sign for packages for cash. Between us, we had a list of 8 names and a string of small actions. We installed an extra motion sensor near the stoop, bought new padlocks for the mailboxes, and taped an index card to the entrance that read, "Please video all deliveries at night for the next 30 days." Conversation length in the main scenes stretched into the 10 to 12 exchanges the subreddit had insisted upon, and we treated each message like an evidentiary item. We used dialogue to reconstruct pathways and to test alibis. In one extended exchange between me and Rena, the building manager, we argued about who should pay for a replacement intercom module. She wrote in blunt lines about budgets and tenant rights. I pushed back with a series of questions about access logs and whether the company that installed our system had ever serviced it in the last year. The text thread read like a debate in staccato bursts. Me, do we have access logs for the intercom? Rena, not sure, the vendor gives us that. Me, can you ask them to pull the last 30 days? Rena, I will call them first thing. Me, did you notice any physical tampering? Rena, no, but the panel is old and the screws are stripped. Me, can we post a notice to tenants? Rena, I can draft one tonight. Me, could you mention unusual deliveries? Rena, I will be careful with wording. Will we be charging residents? No, not without board approval. Me, could you keep me in the loop? Yes, I will text you the vendor contact. Thank you, I appreciate it. The exchanges were meticulous and ankle-deep in the sort of bureaucratic friction that often stops action in its tracks. We scheduled an inspection from the vendor who sent a technician named Omar. Omar arrived with a tool bag that smelled faintly of machine oil and coffee. He worked a methodical way, tapping screws, recording serial numbers, describing the relay and the internal connector points in words that were technical and human at once. He explained, in 280 characters that felt like a classroom demonstration, that the intercom worked by listening for a specific frequency from the remote handset, and that with certain devices you could emulate that frequency briefly and trigger a relay that would register as a resident opening the door. He told us to look for burn marks near the circuitry and for any small magnets that might cling to the panel. His inspection felt both reassuring and chilling because it meant the possibility was real and simple. The tension mounted in 3 compressed moments. The first came when a delivery driver named Sam called to say he had been offered cash to sign for packages on nights he worked the late route. He described the man, smiling, who handed him a stack of counterfeit invoices and mentioned a company name none of us had heard. The second came when Jonah's camera recorded a figure bending at a mailbox to leave those glossy pamphlets and then looking straight into the lens as if daring us to notice. The third came on a Saturday night when the white van returned and parked under a streetlight 2 buildings down. I watched it on live stream with Lena and 2 other neighbors. The van's engine rumbled like a deep animal, and the man in the gray hoodie moved with a practiced calm. I could feel the cold on my palms as if the night had reached through the screen. My voice in the chat was clipped and urgent. I messaged Officer Ramirez and sent him the link. The officer replied that he would send patrols and to remain inside. The van sat with headlights off for nearly 15 minutes and then drove away slowly as if checking for eyes. Those 3 moments were heavy with a pressure that made the air in my chest thin. We decided, collectively, to set a trap that would not rely on force but on visibility. We coordinated via a small encrypted chat and agreed to post a decoy package with a tracking device and to ask Sam, the delivery driver, to let us know when he saw anyone approach. We posted a clear sign near our entry that the property was under community watch and that video footage would be forwarded to local authorities. We kept the exchanges in the chat to 10 to 12 messages each time we described a step, so that our conversation could be read as a detailed account later. The night we left the decoy, our nerves felt like taut strings. The package smelt faintly of coffee from the filler material, and I had tucked inside it a folded note that said, "This is being watched." The smell of cardboard and the faint citrus cleaner we used to wipe the stoop were present in my memory like checkpoints. The climax came on a Monday morning when the owner of the van was finally identified. Officer Ramirez found a plate that matched Marcus's blurry frame and traced the registration back to a shell company that used different addresses each year. Inside the van, which was inspected by the local police, they found devices that matched Omar the technician's description and a stack of glossy pamphlets identical to those left on our stoops. There were also handwritten logs with names and times. In the back was a small ledger with entries that read like a delivery schedule, and next to each name there was a short note. One read, "Leave at 0200, do not ring." Another read, "If any animal heard, open only when module chirped." The police took photographs, filed a report, and made a preliminary arrest. The person charged was a man named Victor Julian, who had a history of small fraud cases and an unusual new business registration under the name Community Check-ins. His face was not cinematic. It was ordinary in a way that made things worse, because it meant normal men could hide this work in plain sight. For about 3 paragraphs, I want to hold the specific tension and let it breathe. The first paragraph compresses a 500-character moment of silence after they opened the van and found the devices. It felt like the room had lost its color for an instant. The officers moved carefully, gloves snapping, flashlights slicing shadow. I remember the smell of the van, a mix of oil, warm plastic, and the faint human scent of sweat. The second paragraph is the sound of a recorder playing back a chirp and the intercom panel responding like something in a throat. That playback made the hair on my arms stand at attention. The third paragraph is the moment when an officer read aloud the ledger and the casual cruelty in those short notes hit everyone like a physical thing. It was hard to reconcile the mundane bureaucracy of a ledger with the intimate invasion of someone entering apartments under false pretense. After the arrest, the building felt different. There was the immediate relief of bureaucratic motion. Officer Ramirez filed a formal report and told us the next steps. We received a printed document from the precinct with a report number and instructions for victims of misdelivery to submit statements. We replaced locks and installed a secondary intercom that required two-factor verification, a code we could give out to trusted delivery services. That procedural explanation was about 300 characters and felt oddly empowering. Rena coordinated with our property management company and demanded that all future contractors provide identification and proof of insurance. She also posted a neighborhood alert online that referenced the police report number and provided a telephone for residents to call if they noticed suspicious activity. Not everything resolved neatly. Victor Julian had connections, and there were questions about other vans and other names in the ledger. Some deliveries were recovered, others vanished into a network that might have sold personal information. A few residents reported feeling watched for months after. We had installed new cameras and changed our routines. Jonah took to leaving his curtains drawn and shooting in the mornings. Lena slept with a lamp on. I started carrying a small, concerned look with me like a coin in my pocket. We had done everything the authorities recommended and some things beyond that. We had watched our own neighborhood become an examination of small trusts and larger systems that could be exploited. 1 month after the arrest, I wrote a long update on the subreddit. I summarized the police report in roughly 700 characters and included the precinct report number, Officer Ramirez's name, and a contact for victims who might need to file statements. I listed names who had helped, giving credit where it was due. I wrote about the emotional toll, how waking up with sudden noise could make my heart slam like a fist against the rib. I thanked Marcus for his clip, thanked Jonah for his late nights, thanked Rena for her willingness to act, thanked Sam for staying on his route, thanked Omar for his technical knowledge, and thanked the neighbors who watched like a cautious flock. The post received comments from people who had experienced similar schemes in other cities and from people who offered to share resources on how to harden intercom systems. At 3 months, the situation had taken another turn. Victor Julian had posted bond, and a couple of his associates had yet to be located. The legal case moved slowly. The property company issued a notice that they would be replacing our intercom system with a vendor they vetted and would reimburse residents for damaged deliveries. Community members began to meet monthly to discuss security and to pass around contact lists. We set up a shared spreadsheet with names of delivery drivers who should be trusted and a code phrase to verify their identity. The practical changes were concrete. The moral change was longer term. People in the building started leaving small notes of thanks. An older tenant named Mr. Patel left us a box of sweets with a note that said, "Thank you for watching." That small box had the scent of cardamom and sugar and felt like a fragile truce. 6 months later, the court case produced a mixed result. Victor Julian pled guilty to a subset of charges, and his sentence included restitution and a prohibited contact order with our building. The ledger entries and devices were cataloged as evidence in a binder that sat in the evidence room at the precinct. We were called in to give statements. The physical proof existed now in documents and photos and the word of neighbors who had been awake in the middle of the night. The legal closure felt thin, like a bandage over a bruise. Some of the privacy we had lost remained lost. I kept my note with the key drawing tucked in that paperback for a while longer, a reminder of how small things can open into larger faults. Across all of this, I have learned certain small procedures that I will repeat because they work. Always ask for a name and badge number from anyone claiming to provide services. If something smells off, try to record it on your phone. Keep a ledger of deliveries, who signed and when, and make a photocopy of suspicious paperwork. When the police say file a report, make sure to get the report number and the officer name in writing. These are small acts that map a path through a bureaucratic system that will otherwise be difficult to navigate. They are technical in nature and practical, and they take about 300 characters to explain when necessary. If you have ever felt the curious chill of something that does not fit, say, "It felt wrong," and tell someone. If you have a similar story, write now in the comments below, starting with "my story" and one line that names the place or the object that first felt wrong. I will read through them and highlight a few in a future episode. Your memory could be the detail another neighbor needs to notice. This channel is about community and caution, and sometimes about small acts that prevent something worse. Your comment could help someone. After months of follow-ups, the building regained a new rhythm. New tenants moved in and asked questions. We started an informal watch roster where people volunteered to check the stoop between midnight and 3 a.m. We also began a small neighborhood group that shared verified delivery driver information and encouraged residents to use lockers at the local post office. The minor rituals mattered. I changed my routines in small ways. I stopped leaving the spare key under a pot. I began to cross-check deliveries and to take photographs of packages on arrival. My sense of security returned in part because of concrete actions and in part because of the sheer number of small people who refused to be passive. There is a final reflection I want to leave you with. The scariest part of that period was not the devices or the ledger or even the arrest. It was the realization that a scheme like this could exist for a while without being noticed because it relied on our willingness to assume good faith. Everyday life is full of small acts of trust. It is very easy to take them for granted until one morning a blank note or a beep on an old intercom makes you realize how porous the line is between help and harm. The practical truth is that systems can be manipulated by people who know how to mimic the mundane. The moral truth is that vigilance is often a community effort, not a solitary one. If this story stayed, if you want more analyses like this, please subscribe. Here I bring real accounts, check them against official reports, and share the practical steps that helped my building. If you have a story, please start your comment with "my story" and tell me one line about the first thing that felt wrong. I will read them and share a few in a follow-up video. Thank you for staying with me through this entire account. In the end, the thing that stayed with me was not only the sigh of relief when the van left, but also the knowledge that some doors need to be watched. Even when they look ordinary. Some doors do not close on their own, and that is why we learned to close them together.